Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I saw something come through my feed today, and I read it, and I kind of looked at what some of the scientists involved said about it, because I saw it on Dr. Brad's wall. And this is an interesting study because this is something that people need to understand. This is actual scientific validation. When we say things like size equals strength, we really do mean it. And again, it has to do with the fact of what we consider to be total muscle mass. At the very least, when people are drug-free, because we do know from other studies that every pound of muscle that you gain from using anabolics doesn't always equal the same force output and strength potential that it does purely from weight training without using any drugs. So for drug-free lifters at least, because usually these studies, they want people who are drug-free. They agree that they've been drug-free for whatever lifetime or so many years, all of this stuff, and they do these studies. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail of what they're saying in this abstract that we have available. And what's interesting is that they actually had Greg Nuckols involved, Bret Contreras, Brad Schoenfeld. These are all names all of you know out there in the evidence-based training world. All right, these are pretty big names at this point out there in the fitness community. And Greg Nuckols has been saying for years, based upon his analysis, and he's tried to say over and over and over, that when you look at advanced power lifters, there is an enormous direct correlation between the muscle mass a lifter has and their total. That is the single most important factor, the amount of total muscle in their body. And a lot of people say, well, that doesn't make sense. Why is this bodybuilder bigger? It's, well, they might look bigger. A lot of it might have to do with body composition, proportion, simple, maybe an extra focus on show muscles. But those show muscles aren't always that big. That total muscle mass for people who actually train the lifts, right? Because you've learned how to perform a squat, right? Someone doesn't know how to perform a squat and they haven't practiced the exercise, they're going to be weaker at it. But for people who perform the exercise, they're stronger at it. If they're bigger, they have more muscle. And what this study looked at was exactly what the factors are. And this is what Greg Nuckols has been saying for years. And I want this to sink in when I explain why this is the case. They looked at all these factors, psychological factors. They looked at joint angles, weaknesses, sticking points. They studied all of these different factors to figure out what was the most important things involved. And what they determined was that the amount of lean body mass, that includes muscle, bone, muscle glycogen, all that stuff, because bone is lean body mass too, and bone is an important factor in your strength. Your bone density matters. Size of your frame matters. But most importantly, muscle mass matters. They determined that the amount of muscle a person had on their body, or total lean mass they had relative to their height, was the single most important determining factor of their 1 rep max on a barbell squat, taken to parallel. And we'll assume, because there are multiple competitive power lifters among these researchers, we'll assume that they actually really did look at parallel too, not what a lot of people will call parallel. They really looked at parallel to see your max squat. Now, a lot of people are going to say, wait, this doesn't make sense. So you're saying the amount of total muscle you have on your body is going to determine how strong your squat is relative to your height? Yeah. Keep in mind, Ronnie Coleman could squat over 800 pounds. Just throwing that out there for the unawares. And here's the point with that. Total muscle. Not how big your biceps are. Because when you think about it, what muscles are involved in the squat? All the largest muscles in your body. Your glutes, your quads, your hamstrings. Yeah, those are major muscles, but that's not the only thing involved. A lot of people aren't aware your lats are involved in the squat. Your lats do contribute to your squat. Your traps contribute to their squat. They might not contribute as much as your glutes and quads do, but they contribute. All the biggest muscles in the body contribute to your squat. They contribute to your 1 rep max. And the bigger a muscle is, the more potential contractile force it has. So it makes sense. It actually makes sense here. And yeah, it is fair to say that if a person out squats someone else of the same height by 100 pounds, they probably have more muscle on their body. So in other words, if you're 5'7" and your bro is 5'7", and he squats 500 pounds and you squat 400, this data is suggesting he probably has more lean mass than you do. He most likely does. And most likely a significant amount more. Because look at the biggest muscles in the body. Adding serious muscle to your glutes will add body weight. Adding muscle to your lats, your entire thoracic lumbar sling, will put a lot of weight on you. But it might not make you look as big from the front from a bodybuilder perspective, right? Quads will, but these other muscles won't. I mean, when people think of right now, a lot of times people look at just someone's biceps and pecs and delts and they assume their size is based purely on that. But that's not the case. Those muscles are smaller. If a person is proportionately developed, I can tell you right now, those muscles that you think of as show muscles could be as little as 10% of the entire muscle on their body, right? So even if they double the size of those muscles, double the amount of muscle in those areas, it's not going to add very much muscle weight. Quads, glutes, hamstrings, lats, your core, that's where your real muscle weight is on your body. That's your real muscle mass. This incidentally tends to be the muscles that improve overall performance the most. Athletic performance, jumping, sprinting, kicking, right? Pulling, picking up something heavy off the floor, and of course squatting. Those are the important muscles involved. So when you understand it, that's why that's the biggest factor, is because that's most of the muscle in your body. You use at least 70% of the muscle mass in your body on a squat. So obviously it contributes. And when you understand that a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, that also makes sense that it's the most important factor. It's even more important than the skills training. All the skill in the world still isn't going to get your squat up to someone who practices a squat less, who has twice the muscle mass you have, particularly if they're close to your height. Of course it's not. It can't. It takes muscle to move weight. And that is a biological fact. And there are a few genetic freaks, but the only difference is those genetic freaks still gain muscle in proportion to their lifts. It's just that they're more efficient with their use of it. But those are kind of genetic outliers. And those really small guys you think of who lift a lot like that, they still tend to have a lot of glute, a lot of quad, a lot of back. And they tend to be very lean, so maybe they stay at a lower body weight. And now, for some people would say, well, why does that matter? Doesn't it take all these? What if you have a weak link somewhere? If you have a weak link somewhere, you still can probably squat a lot. In other words, someone who maybe their glutes are a weak link, maybe their glute development is lagging, or their quad development is lagging considerably behind, those muscles still contribute. And what we know based upon studies is that when you're dealing with a compound movement, when you try to explode with a weight as hard as you can, which is what you're doing on a max, if you're trying to hit a max, you're going to lift it as hard as you can. We know that all those muscles fire with everything they have, right? That actually recruits more muscle fibers than a mind-muscle connection does in every study we've ever done, whether it's a compound or a isolation movement. All those muscles are going to contract maximally, and your squat is going to be the sum total force that they can produce. And if one of those muscles is lagging, it doesn't mean you don't have a strong squat. If your squat is weak, there's more than one muscle causing it to be weak. It's not that you have a weak link, it's that you are weak. You just don't have enough muscle mass. But if you say you have weak spinal erectors, yeah, your squat might be 20 or 30 pounds lower. And if you were to strengthen and hypertrophy your spinal erectors, you might put another 20 pounds on your squat. But if you have massive quads and hamstrings and glutes, you're still going to have a massive squat, even with that weak link. And so again, if the quads could be the weak link, it doesn't mean that you don't have a monstrous squat still. It just means that your squat would be even better if you bring that weak area up. And that's what people need to understand. A weak lift is because you are weak, particularly with a squat. It means you just don't have enough muscle and you haven't trained the exercise. And therein lies the difference. And so when you see someone who has a weak squat, even though they might look fairly muscular, which you might want to factor in is they might not have as much total muscle as you think they do, particularly in their back and their lower body. Because maybe you're just seeing their delts and biceps. Maybe those areas are lagging. That's what this research would suggest. Or those areas are not only lagging, but they used a bunch of drugs to build their size. And they didn't train that hard, and therefore it created a disproportion that shouldn't actually exist. But interesting study, and it kind of confirms what a lot of people have been saying all this time. A bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, and the more muscle you have, usually the stronger you are, which also goes back to the other point. If it's the most important factor, I would also suggest this works the other direction. If you get your squat as strong as possible, you're probably going to put on a lot of muscle from it. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.